Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Vanessa Tyler. So, you're going to do it. You're going to step out and be an entrepreneur. Have you checked all the angles? Well, our next guest, Lidow, has, and he's here to tell us what it really means to become an entrepreneur. Derek, thank you so much for joining us.
Vanessa, thank you for having me.
Let's start with your success journey. For many, your career on the New York Stock Exchange would probably be the end all, but for you, it was really a launching pad. Tell me about the time at the exchange and also talk about the various businesses you've created.
I've been very fortunate that I've had several successful careers. The first one was in the semiconductor industry. I have a PhD in applied physics, and so I'm sort of a techie, and that was a natural place for me to wind up, and particularly the era that I was in the semiconductor industry was the golden age of semiconductors. You know, new devices were being invented all the time, and computers were taking all the devices that we could make as fast as we could make them, and so it was a wonderful time filled with opportunity, and I was able to rise up through the ranks and eventually become CEO of a large global New York Stock Exchange listed semiconductor company. We had factories in 9 different countries, and we made tens of millions of these little things for people's computers and cell phones and the like every day. And it was wonderful, and I was very successful. The company became enormously valuable. And I could have continued doing that. But I felt that I wanted to go start something from scratch. I had some ideas that I felt were important for the industry, and nobody else was doing them, and so ultimately it was an opportunity to put my money where my mouth was. And so I started a company to provide information to first the semiconductor industry, but then the whole technology industry that previously was unavailable. And yet I had always wanted, when I was the CEO and nobody could provide it for me, so I figured out how to get that information, and that created a successful company.
What is the greatest skill you have come to rely on to make those businesses successful? The business you started, and the businesses you've created.
The skill that I use most is what I call relationship building. So it's ultimately about how to create a mutually beneficial relationship, partnership with the people that you want to rely upon or you want to have on your team. And it's so much more powerful than understanding physics or computer coding. And ultimately, it has enabled me in almost all situations to be able to attract people to want to work for me, and then feel incredibly fulfilled, mutually fulfilled in the relationships that we create, very powerfully enabling us to do things that either of us couldn't have done on our own.
Are most entrepreneurs by choice or by circumstance? You mentioned Vidal Herrera in the book.
My latest career as a professor of entrepreneurship, I get to see now what the facts say and what the research says. And people have started researching entrepreneurs for the last 20, 30 years. And by the way, the official measurement is that 80% of the entrepreneurs are by choice and 20% are by need. But I think that these are very narrow definitions. I believe that the vast majority of entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because they feel a need of their own, that only by starting their own business and or being their own boss or showing their parents what they actually could do, will they feel fulfilled? And so I feel that the vast majority of entrepreneurs are pulled, to fulfill a personal need. And therefore, it wasn't the opportunity that came along, it was their finding an opportunity to satisfy what they needed to do anyway. Now, Vidal Herrera, who is one of the entrepreneurs that I profile in my book, and, he's a fascinating, wonderful individual who grew up in the barrio of East LA, barely made it through high school, ultimately had to work every day to help support his family. And so he didn't really have a lot of skills. And he heard one day that the way you can make the best hourly wage was if you were willing to work with dead people, because they paid you more if you were willing to put up with the stench and whatever. And he thought that sounded like a good idea, so he went, and it wasn't hard for him to find a job as an orderly in a hospital morgue. And he got into it. He felt, that this was something not only that made him good money, but that he sort of excelled at. And that ultimately caught the attention of the LA coroner, who hired him, to train as an assistant coroner, and he became very adept at doing autopsies. An injury he sustained, though, while doing an investigation of a suspicious death, caused him to become partially paralyzed for a while because he collapsed several discs. And he was laid off, permanent disability, no more job. And the disability couldn't cover his mortgage and his, he had a new baby, and he was really despondent. And ultimately, it took him 2 years to convince the Veterans Administration to let him, as a contractor, do autopsies for them. And then he turned that into, he put a flyer together and gave it to all the funeral homes within a 100-mile radius, hundreds of funeral homes. If somebody has a loved one that had a mysterious death and they want to find out what happened, I'll arrange for the autopsy. So he invented this business of personal autopsies. And he's an incredibly successful entrepreneur.
1-800-AUTOPSY.
1-800-AUTOPSY.
That was almost by choice and circumstance, so it's almost a combination for some people as well.
It is. And it's a great example of how, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you're feeling this urge, look inward. What is it that you do and can do to make other people happy? Maybe it is helping them understand why their loved ones passed away.
Talk about the reason for writing Building on Bedrock. What is the bedrock?
Bedrocks are types of entrepreneurs, and they're actually the most common type of entrepreneur, but the type of entrepreneur that gets the least amount of press. So these are people that build their business slow and steady. They ultimately want to reduce the risk because they can't afford failure. And they want to build these businesses, as I mentioned, to satisfy personal needs and goals. And therefore, they really want to remain in control over their business and grow it as they see fit. Now, that's contrasted with the type of entrepreneur that we read so much about, like everything is written about, what are called high-risk entrepreneurs, sort of what we think of Silicon Valley. And these are entrepreneurs whose motivations are to maximize potential return, have the greatest potential return, which means doing it fast. And hey, if you fail, you move on, so fail fast. And use other people's money. That way you can afford to fail and fail fast. So I term it shoot for the moon and use other people's money. And they attract a lot of attention, and they do some important things for our economy. but it's the bedrock entrepreneurs that deliver 90% of all the value that's created by startups. And we're talking about this is how all the new jobs, the vast majority of all the innovation, a huge fraction of all the economic growth in our society is based upon these bedrock entrepreneurs that have become these unsung heroes in our society.
You have great examples in the book. You start out talking about truth about one of the most successful businesses in the world, Walmart. What lesson should we learn from Sam Walton? And you make it clear perfection is not one of those lessons.
So Sam Walton, he knew he wanted to work for himself, but he did it the way a vast majority of all people learn entrepreneurship. He started with a franchise. A franchise in a small town. He bought basically a bankrupt franchise for close to nothing. And the franchisor gave him a big thick manual. Here's how you run your business and a little bit of training. And that was his start in retail. And he did what they said and fixed the things that the previous owner hadn't done so well. But then he felt that there was more he could do. Wasn't just going to stick to the manual and that was going to be it. So he would borrow and steal good ideas wherever he could get them. He went into his competitors' stores. He drove to the next town and the next town over to go into those stores and see what was working and what wasn't. And every week he would try something new or several new things. And those that worked out, he'd keep doing, and those that didn't, he wouldn't. And so he set a pace of relentless improvement. Every week, a little bit better. And you know what? When you improve things week by week, they accumulate. And so he was able to open more franchise stores. And it wasn't until 17 years later that he decided he knew so much that he was confident he could go out on his own. So Walmart wasn't something he did until he was 17 years into the business.
What is it that most people don't understand about being an entrepreneur?
So most people come to me and they say, well, how do I get this idea that's going to make a good company? And I say, the idea really isn't the big thing. Sam Walton started with a franchise, so he had no idea. He bought the idea. And I tell another story in the book about probably the best idea of the 20th century. And what happened there was, so William Shockley was this famous engineer, and he invented the transistor. He co-invented it. Everybody knew instantly that this was going to change the world. This was something people wanted. Made the New York Times, everybody knew it was so important. And he wanted it to be his legacy, so he left Bell Laboratories. And of course, he got all the money. He literally got a blank check from some people, start a company. He hired 9 of the smartest people he knew. And because it was his company, he could start the company anywhere he wanted. And so he chose to make it near where his mom lived. And his mom lived in Palo Alto, California. And so a little known fact is Silicon Valley is where it is today because of William Shockley's mom. So he moves all these 9 smart people. The world is waiting with bated breath to buy these transistors from him. Nothing happens. A year, nothing happens. Not one single device is produced because he is yelling at his people, these smart people. He's calling them dumb. He's berating them in public. He goes around the backs to the people that work for them and say, do what I say, don't do what they say. He takes all the credit. He changes his mind almost on a weekly basis. His motivation for doing this was to prove to everybody that he was the world's greatest scientist, okay? Not an entrepreneur, really. He didn't really want that. So here it is, the best idea of the century, all the money you could ever want, all the smart people that were dedicating their lives to helping this happen, and it's a massive failure. So it's not the idea. It's ultimately about you being able to execute in delivering happiness to some group of people, and enough happiness that they're willing to gladly give you money in return.
We do know companies like Facebook, Snapchat. Suppose you want to start a business, but you're not high tech. Can your low tech ideas be just as successful?
Yeah, so I think this tech idea scares people away. But in my book, I tell this story, real entrepreneur, Stephanie DeMarco, and she was an accountant, not a techie, and she was doing some tedious accounting, very arcane type of bookkeeping, and felt that it should be done by computer. She recruits a friend from college, that knew how to program computers, and they program to automate this accounting function that her boss thinks is great, and she decides to go try and make it a business, which turned into an incredibly successful software business. It was sold recently for $2.7 billion. So here it is, a female entrepreneur, an accountant, not a techie, okay, who dominates a software field. And I tell the story of how she did it very meticulously, step by step, very thoughtfully, and by delivering this arcane piece of software, gave her an entree into a business that ultimately she expanded and expanded to basically help these people run their investment businesses.
She was more, I guess, a bedrock.
Absolutely bedrock.
You seem less impressed with the high-risk entrepreneurs.
I wouldn't say that I'm less impressed. Their stories are already overhyped in the media. And they serve an important place in our economic growth. But they represent just literally a couple of thousand people. When we're talking about a country where right now 20 million people are in the midst of starting businesses or the like. And a few thousand of them will succeed in doing it through this high-risk way. And it's important if you want to create a social media company or a biotech company, and the economics require you to take these high risks. But in the vast majority of all the businesses, you don't need to. You can grow your business in a slow and steady fashion, maintain control, and ultimately deliver a lot of benefit to society as you're also feeling tremendously personally fulfilled by what you've created.
How to pick your partner and how to end a business relationship.
I tell my students, look, keep a list, start now, of all the people that you come in contact with that may sometime in the distant future be someone that you want to ask for help. And maintain those relationships, because ultimately the people you meet are your best source of potential partners. You really want to avoid being partners with strangers unless you don't, absolutely have to. And if you are diligent about going out and meeting new people and being sensitive to what they have to offer, then you can build a pretty darn good team based upon the people that you've met throughout your life. And And that's how bedrock entrepreneurs basically do it. Sam Walton, he went in and as he was casing his competitors' stores, he'd go to the managers and introduce himself. And he'd flatter them, which would get them to tell him more about it. But if he was impressed by their store, he'd stay in contact with them. He'd visit him again when he was in town. And when he had a new store opening, he knew exactly whom to hire.
And these are people, of course, who are good at their job and perhaps have some character traits that you like, because you wouldn't want to get somebody who's great, but maybe on the other end of it is not as trustworthy or is not as upstanding in character.
Right. That's really important in businesses, to have somebody that's who has the same values as you do and whom you can trust.
You say it doesn't take a lot of money to start your own business, but what if you need money to hold on?
Money to hold on? Well, that can be a slippery slope. Ultimately, what these stories that I tell of real bedrock entrepreneurs demonstrates is that they all really focused on getting to profitability as quickly as possible. Once you start making profits, then your business is a stable business, and then you can build upon it in as much as you want. And so that's a really important bedrock principle, is start your business in such a way that you start with the profitable part, not the unprofitable part. And that will give you that stability that you need. And also minimize the requirements for you, going into your bank account or taking a huge mortgage out or the like. Maybe you need something to get you started. An average business today, of all sizes, the biggest businesses and whatever, the average is about $30,000. But many businesses, 30% of the successful businesses start with literally zero. Zero.
Nothing.
You make profit, you're ahead of the game in the first thing you sell.
It takes guts to be an entrepreneur, but you're right, self-confidence is somewhat overrated.
Self-confidence is somewhat overrated because, again, there's this myth that, to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to be so risk tolerant, right? You have to love the thrill of betting it all. And the research doesn't support that at all. The vast majority of entrepreneurs are risk averse, just like all of us. And they prioritize their actions to minimize the risks of failure or something not working out. So they take longer to investigate something than a high-risk entrepreneur, because they want to make sure that when they do it, it's going to work. And when you do that, by the way, you get a much higher return on your investment, both in money in terms of ultimately on time, because most things work.
Have a gut feeling, but go back and do a little research on it.
Oh yeah, test it out.
What is the electrified third rail, that mistake that every entrepreneur should avoid at all costs?
Falling in love with their idea and not being willing to change it based upon the feedback that you get from customers. So many entrepreneurs fall in love with their idea and they think the customer is stupid for not understanding it, when in actuality the situation is reversed. You're being stupid if you don't listen to what they say they need and that they want. Your responsibility as an entrepreneur is to make some group of people happy. Happier than they are. That's your responsibility. It's an externally focused thing, and if you're in love with your idea, you're internally focused, and that's not going to lead to very good results over a long period of time.
You discussed the who. Who is an entrepreneur?
Entrepreneurship is a word that gets bandied around a lot, and so it means different things to different people. And in our society, it often means this hero, this person that disrupts an entire industry with a single lightning bolt of an idea, okay, that crumbles the existing infrastructure. And that we project onto each of our own definitions of entrepreneurship, a fanciful idea of what we want it to be. And so we are, in essence, both stereotyping people and excluding people with our definitions. And we can, play these tricks on ourselves. Oh, well, if these entrepreneurs are the heroes with lightning bolts, I'm not like that, so I shouldn't be an entrepreneur. And this is hurting our society because ultimately, many of us have really important things that we can contribute and to help groups of people be happier and to hire people and to, bring new ideas to the market. And so I try to, make people understand being an entrepreneur is just as simple as knowing how to make some group of people happy enough to give you money in return. Don't make it more complicated. Don't say it's a natural ability that you're born with. Realize that this is just something that each of us can do if it is something that we'll feel fulfilled by doing ourselves.
What is the difference between an entrepreneur and a small business owner?
Well, that's one of these, typecasting things. So I get very annoyed at my colleagues who, in some academics, will exclude small business owners from their research on entrepreneurs. And I point out that, look, every business starts small. Every business starts small. And some of the greatest businesses, and some that I profile in the books, Sam Walton, but also Walt Disney, McDonald's and Ray Kroc and Estee Lauder, all of these fabulous entrepreneurs, they all started as small businesses. And what can distinguish a small business from a business that ultimately gets large is the person's personal motivation for doing this. Why should we denigrate them just because they want to keep their business to be more manageable, to be something that is, employs their family and makes their family feel comfortable? What's wrong with that? I mean, why should we say that because that's what they personally want, that they don't get to be able to call themselves an entrepreneur? That's not right.
But it doesn't matter the size of business.
It doesn't. It shouldn't. Yeah. Right? Size shouldn't matter.
You have a surprising statistic in your book. You say 90% of entrepreneurs, no matter how long they've been in business, make less than they could by offering their same sets of skills and experiences to an established employer.
Yeah. So that is research that's been conducted several times and verified. And because being an entrepreneur is personally satisfying, entrepreneurs tend to be willing to accept less profits and less remuneration than they could get by selling their skills on the marketplace. And it's sort of a paradox, but that's what happens. And it's a trade-off. Economists always feel a little uncomfortable about that because they think everything should be down, about the money, the bottom line. But that's why entrepreneurs are sort of challenging to understand, because not everything they do is about money. Matter of fact, most things they do are not about money. So don't use money as the metric to try and describe their actions.
But you do say that you cannot be an entrepreneur if you are working alone.
The point I'm trying to make is that you can't have much impact by working alone, right? How much can you personally do to change the world on your own? It's pretty difficult. I mean, even artists, and authors or whatever that, write their book in solitary confinement, okay? They still have agents and they have personal assistants, and if they're having impact, right? They have people that are planning their travel and their interviews and the like. They have staff. They need that in order to amplify their impact. So we all need that. And when we're providing a product and service and to more and more people, boy, we need a lot of people to help us. And so that's not saying, you can't be a solitary entrepreneur. It's just that realize if you aspire to actually have, significant impact, the people side of entrepreneurship is going to start to dominate what you need to do and how you do things.
You say entrepreneurial opportunities are everywhere we look. Mm-hmm. How can we spot them? Spotting
them is a skill. But here's why we don't have to look in an infinite number of places. So this isn't something that is going to have to take a lifetime. So every industry is changing all the time. It's changing because their customers are changing in what they want. But it's also changing because technology and laws and the environment are changing around these businesses, and therefore how they position themselves is no longer the best way for them to proceed. And yet as big businesses, they can't change very quickly, right? So there's always opportunities for entrepreneurs to come into existing businesses and do what the big businesses haven't figured out yet, or are too slow in being able to respond because there's got so much, bureaucracy. So there's always that. You can either benefit from that also by taking away their customers, or you can create a business to help that business change faster.
Wow. So wherever there's a complaint, there's an opportunity.
You bet. Exactly. So just look there and you will find opportunities.
Ideas are not the keys to entrepreneurial success. Why?
Well, ultimately, an idea is something that you have, and it's your personal creativity that sparks these things. And it's ultimately what's going to satisfy some group of people that's going to make them happy. So it's an externally driven, entrepreneurship is externally driven, and the idea is internally driven. And as we were talking about a little bit before, that's why that's something that takes down so many otherwise smart and creative aspiring entrepreneurs, is that they fall in love with their idea, and that makes them deaf to all the important essential inputs that they get from their customers.
We think about entrepreneurs, and I think to myself, why would someone want to be an entrepreneur? Because it's risky, it's stressful, and time-consuming. But you mentioned that there's something inside of people that really want to make other people happy.
Yeah. So the why people become entrepreneurs is really interesting and fascinating and important to understand. So to be an entrepreneur, you've got to overcome all these challenges for long periods of time, okay? And many people think that they want to be entrepreneurs because it sounds like it's going to be fun, or it sounds like they can make a lot of money quickly. But because your ideas of what you can accomplish are generated in the logic part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, they are all very short-term motivators. So we're really good at saying I'm hungry and then finding something to eat, or maybe saying, hey, I'm feeling tired and I'm going to take a day off. But our ability to plan things for more than a month at a time is very limited. What drives our long-term actions are actually our motivations that are stored in the back part of our brain. They're called our implicit motivations. And these are deeply emotional desires or fears that we have that literally drive our long-term actions. And they're driven by things like, I need to show my parents that I deserve more recognition than I got when I was growing up, or it may be to seek revenge on a playground rival that called you a nasty name and your entire class laughed at you, and that hurt is embedded in the back of your brain, and you are going to do everything in your power. You may not realize it, but you are going to do everything in your power to show your third grade class that they were completely wrong. And so it's these things that drive us to overcome obstacles, to want to change in order to better satisfy our customers' needs, to find those extra reserves of energy when you're exhausted and you feel beaten down. And those implicit motivations, and people have done a lot of research on this, and they are the best predictor of entrepreneurial successes. Why are you understanding why you're doing it?
So entrepreneurs have more of that than the average person, more of that drive that's right in the core of them.
Yeah. But there are things that you can do. So for example, by understanding what that drive is, and most people don't understand that, but by taking the time, maybe getting the help to understand what your implicit motivations are, you can better align them with your explicit motivations. Okay, so those are the motivations of, hey, I'm going to take a day off tomorrow because it looks like it's going to be a pretty day. Well, that may not be very well aligned with what you want to accomplish in the back of your brain. Okay. When you understand what's in the back of your brain, then you have the opportunity to align your short-term actions to be consistent. And that's what makes you incredibly effective.
And successful.
And successful. And this is what is being termed today grit. Okay, is this alignment of external and implicit motivations. So understanding your why allows you to be far more effective at doing what it is that's important to you.
And makes you tireless.
Absolutely. Relentless in the case of Sam Walton, or all these other entrepreneurs. They were some form of relentless.
The high-risk entrepreneur with the big dreams has also to be a big salesperson to get other people to invest in their dream. You call it the Silicon Valley model.
Yeah. So the high-risk entrepreneurs are very important for our country. They have allowed us to lead in areas like e-commerce and biotech and social media and the like. And so these areas are your competitive advantage comes from things like economies of scales or network effects, where it's basically a winner-takes-all race to see who's the first one that gets the critical mass to destroy the competitors. And in this area, you need to take that risk. It's winner-take-all. And the Silicon Valley ethos is very tuned to helping these businesses, focusing on these businesses. They're high payoff, very risky. Only one's going to win, and this is who we get fascinated with, right? We get fascinated with the winners that take all. They're more wealthy than the rest of the entrepreneurs, and they got there faster. And so that's whom we read about, and yet they're only a very, very small fraction of all the entrepreneurs. We're talking about literally a handful every year that succeed in this.
Let's get to Monday morning. How likely will you get a venture capital firm to join in your dreams?
Yes.
Tough.
It is tough. And again, people don't realize it. We think that Silicon Valley is, what all entrepreneurs need to do to get that money from a venture capitalist. And the facts of the matter are that venture capital invests in about 1,400 new companies a year. All of venture capital in North America, 1,400 new companies here. That number has been about constant for the last 20 or more years, right? So venture capital is not investing in more companies, even though they might have more money to invest. They might be writing bigger checks, but the truth of the matter is they're spending their money on helping startups grow that are already established. So once they find their customers and the like, and maybe they're not yet profitable, that's where the money's going. They're not going into the real startups because that's too risky. And this Monday morning thing is a funny phenomena because absolutely, 99% of all the venture capital firms hold a meeting Monday morning, their Monday morning partners meeting. And this is when they make their decisions on who they're going to support. And aspiring entrepreneurs should really understand what they're talking about in this meeting and why they're talking the way they're doing. And I have a whole chapter that basically describes a Monday morning meeting and how this business is really working.
What about an accelerator?
So accelerators are fairly recent experiments in helping startups get successfully launched and making small investments in a large number of startups. So basically, it's like a shotgun. Let's shoot the shotgun and see, if we down any birds. With the shot rather than the rifle shots, which are what the classic venture capitalists are doing, where they're taking very few companies and they're looking at them for many months before they decide to invest in them. Now, accelerators have until recently been growing like wildfire because it's a hot idea. And it's a fun business to operate. You get a lot of high energy people into a space, and you give them a lot of coffee and stimulants, and you get to talk to them, and they listen to what you say, and then hopefully you've helped them, launch a successful business. It's been around for too short of a time to say what the statistics are. But right now, the statistics are not particularly favorable that this model of accelerators is giving a higher financial return or even the same financial return that venture capital has given.
How do many entrepreneurs mess up the how?
it's really unfortunate that entrepreneurs, even those that have really listened to the customers and have a lot to offer, don't execute very well. And they don't execute well because often they haven't taken the time to prepare the skills that they need, which are going to be heavily weighted towards people skills. Because again, there's not very much you can do on your own. You can't service all that many customers on your own, even if you are running an app. There's a lot of work to be done to run a decent sized business. And so they don't realize what skills they need and where they're going to find these skills. So skill finding is really an essential part of the how. Again, I profile Sam Walton, who was great at scouting around and understanding what managers he could steal from competitor stores. And he was great at giving them a lot of autonomy to perform better for him in running a store than they ever had for their previous bosses. And that gave the store managers a lot of sense of pride in what they accomplished. So they put more of their effort into this, which is a very positive feedback cycle. So when you are starting to be successful, this is the time to attract people with significant skills that complement what it is that you do. And the thing that can derail the entrepreneur here is to want to be the smartest person, to want to know it all, to not let people make decisions on their own, even though that they have the experience to do so. And this ultimately limits the growth potential with so many entrepreneurs, and ultimately makes them very frustrated that they aren't being able to accomplish all that they could.
Does entrepreneurial success boil down to skill? What are the core skills to being an entrepreneur?
Having studied now entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurs, unsuccessful entrepreneurs, there are these 5 skills that really distinguish your ability to perform. And perform in such a way that you get a lot of people that dedicate their lives to helping you fulfill your vision. And one is this self-awareness, because self-awareness is essential for understanding what you're capable of doing, and therefore when and how you need to ask for help. So without self-awareness, you're not very good at seeking out help and knowing when you need it. The relationship building is ultimately, as we've touched on, creating the bonds with these people that are going to dedicate, their lives, and making it in such a way that they are going to feel fulfilled by helping you achieve your vision. And then motivating others is relationship building is a pretty intense skill to practice, and effectively you can only do it with a handful or two of people. So you have these very dynamic, hypercharged relationships with your team, your core team. And beyond that, though, you still have to get people to want to dedicate their lives to do that. And that's a different skill, which is, I call and others call, motivating others. And so understanding how to touch people, large numbers of people, and in an emotionally impactful way that they feel a sense of well-being in working for you or being around you, that's also an important skill to have. The fourth one is leading change, and that's so essential in a startup, because why? startups need to change every week or every month because they're growing, they're learning from their customers, they are responding to market conditions and the like, and yet people are resistant to change. They're resistant to change for good reason. Hey, it's risky. Why can't I continue to do what has been successful for me, even if it's a routine, repetitive thing? Why do I have to change? And so that's a set of skills, leading change, that is essential for all entrepreneurs that aspire to grow their companies. And then this fifth one, which is enterprise basics, is understanding that your company is going to grow and mature. And in a certain fashion, you want to build on a solid foundation, or you want your tree to establish its roots before it gets too tall, because otherwise it could topple over. So how you deliver your leadership actually needs to change at certain critical junctions. And so many entrepreneurs get perplexed by the fact that what they were doing, which was creating major success, last week and for the last couple of months, all of a sudden is getting everybody really frustrated and morale's going down, and they have missed this critical transition point in their business. They don't understand that there was this. So just by having some basic understanding of where these transitions happen and what the enterprise and your people are needing from you as a leader now is different than it was, a couple of weeks ago, is incredibly powerful. And none of these 5 skills require you to be born with any special trait. It's not like Superman or whatever. Ultimately, just knowing them and then being able to practice them a little bit will make you very effective.
The story of Walt Disney, fascinating man. He actually created a new technique, matching sound with animation. And you talked about, finding a need that wasn't there before, and boy, did he.
It's a great story. So most people don't realize that Walt Disney went bankrupt with his first animation studio, which he did in a high-risk way. So he brought in a lot of strangers, and a lot of strangers gave him money. And he didn't have the skills to compete in the already established animation marketplace. And so he went bankrupt and got run out of town, basically out of Kansas City, and he had no choice but to go live in the basement of his uncle, who happened to live in Los Angeles. And but he still was going to be persistent, and he had this drive that he wanted to show people that he was, had these visions of how animation could change their lives. And at first, it was in simple cartoons that were shown before, the feature film in the movie theater, and he was, so driven to show people that he, his animations were better. He borrowed every penny he could from everybody that he knew, but he borrowed. He didn't get investors. Okay, so he put his own financial well-being on the line to add sound to his animation, but he really didn't know how to do that, so he had to invent a method. And that was the very first Mickey Mouse cartoon called Steamboat Willie that was an instant success when he finally found somebody who was willing to show it. Many people were willing to show it. Everybody that saw it thought it was fabulous, but he kept on upping the price. So that's why he had a hard time finding people to show it, because it got him more confident and more, sort of hubristic, and he would say, no, I want more. I want more than anybody's ever paid for a cartoon to just show this feature. So finally some guy, some theater owner said, okay, I'll pay you what you're asking. We'll try it for a week. And it was such a sensation that it was written up in the newspapers, and everybody flocked to the movie theater, not to see the feature film, which nobody's ever heard of after it played, but everybody, then knew Mickey Mouse. And this gave Walt Disney such a sense of empowerment that he quickly improved his skills and developed, again, brand new skills that had never been done before. So in subsequent Mickey Mouse, but then in his, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, he invented more and more animation techniques. And then when he was done with that, he invented whole new ways to entertain the family with Disneyland.
Although he did seem like a difficult man, but a brilliant man.
Yes, so he had his vision, and he only wanted to work with people that would help him, right? So if you weren't going to help him, then you were uninteresting to him. Now there are many successful entrepreneurs like that, right? Steve Jobs is very similar to Walt Disney. Revere Steve Jobs, and we sort of have forgotten about Walt Disney, but Walt Disney impacted a bigger percentage of the population of the world than even Steve Jobs did. And the way they worked is that they effectively is that they had to create an inner circle and of these people that they understood how they were going to help them achieve their vision, and let those people deal with everybody else. In the case of Disney, it was his brother. And he was so fortunate to have his brother on the team. He couldn't have done it without it. Disney would not have been a success without his brother Roy.
What about learning new skills? You said you can't grow your business without it.
What's funny, again, are misconceptions or about entrepreneurship, right? That we're being told, shoot for the moon and go ahead, disrupt entire industries. To do that, you need to, deliver to the customers, existing customers of that industry, experiences that exceed what they're already getting. So you have to be incredibly skilled to get there. But what most people don't realize is, or have lost sight of, is that you don't have to compete in the big leagues as the way to start in your business. Sam Walton started in a tiny little town, okay? And even Elon Musk with Tesla started making little sports roadsters out of car parts that he bought from Lotus. So the story is that you want to find the entrepreneurial league where your skills are already going to help you deliver more meaningful experiences or more successful experiences to the customers. And then you work your way up from there. And the way you work your way up from there is by getting new skills or developing your skills to be even more masterful, more world-class. Walt Disney being a prime example of how he improved his animation skills relentlessly, just like Sam Walton relentlessly improved his merchandising and his store experience.
What about staying in your lane as an entrepreneur? I believe in the book you use the sports analogy, big leagues versus sport for the fun of it.
Thinking of entrepreneurship as basically a sport, or a contest, and understanding which league you should play in? Are you going to play in the pickup afternoon, Saturday afternoon, league, or are you going to, do minor league or go all the way for the major leagues? Is a great analogy to figure out where you fit, where you can fit inside an industry, existing industry. But I also mentioned here that occasionally, just like in sports, there are new sports invented. There are new industries that come to pass. And those are opportunities to define what a competitive profile would look like. And this is where we often see these very young people, both in the sports world and in the entrepreneurial world, come in and use techniques for the first time. A recent example that of both is e-gaming leagues, right? So now playing video games, it has become a sport, but it's a brand new business, and it's fertile opportunity to define the competitive advantages. So you can go to the big leagues because there are no other league when you invent it. But this doesn't happen very often. You have to be in the right place at the right time. So this is something that a person that needs to be their own boss and has important implicit and explicit motivations for being an entrepreneur, this isn't something that they can really count on.
Talk about time. Time to set up, time to build, time to become profitable.
So this is really interesting because time, whether you're a bedrock entrepreneur or a high-risk entrepreneur, your sense of time and your strategy with time are different. So with a bedrock entrepreneur, they want to do everything they can to compress the amount of time that it takes to get to profitability. Why? Because profitability is that safety zone that they want to get into. It's stability. And so they want to take those sets of actions in the fastest possible sequence to get to profit. Whereas with high-risk entrepreneurs, where they're basically shooting for the moon and using other people's money, their sense is that they can buy time when they need it. Okay? And ultimately, they want to buy enough time to figure out how to create ignition. And so they're not in this wanting to compress time to get to profitability. They sort of want to extend it, and they're going to use their money to extend that time that they have, that runway. And then ultimately, when they even find their source of ignition, the idea that might be going viral, they want to extend the time that they have to grow before they have to be profitable. So they're polar opposite strategies on how to use time, whether or not you're a high risk or you're a bedrock entrepreneur. And that's, again, why it's so essential that people understand that they have this choice, that there is this difference, that this difference is fundamentally important to how you're going to decide to run your business.
Talk about money buying you time and buying you a way to get to profitability faster. How does it play if you are a high-risk entrepreneur or a bedrock entrepreneur?
So, bedrock entrepreneurs want to minimize the investment they need to make to reach profitability. So for them, money makes things riskier. it depletes bank accounts, and so they get closer to failure, which they don't want to do. And therefore, if they can take a little time to reduce the amount of money that they need to reduce the risk of losing their money, they will do that. In the high risk, money allows them to buy skills, buys them. I mean, we read now about how people buy their Twitter followers and they buy their people that like their page on Facebook, right? And so a lot of these businesses are buying their first customers so that they have some hype and something to talk about. But that's not really the business, right? So that's just how they're investing these other people's money to, ultimately try to shoot for the moon.
What about location? Where should you build your business? Must it always be an obvious place like Silicon Valley or something like that?
A lot of my students, when they graduate, they move to Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley has a very distinct culture, a culture of wanting to go big and wanting to find your proprietary, insight, and there's a lot of money floating around to attract your idea, although very few people succeed at doing that. And so Silicon Valley is an important and great place to start certain types of businesses. They're called vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems. But Silicon Valley is not a vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystem for all types of businesses. It is for high-risk businesses, but it's not for bedrock businesses. And bedrock businesses are at a disadvantage in a place like Silicon Valley because things are more expensive. Housing, everything's more expensive in Silicon Valley. And here it is, as a bedrock entrepreneur, you want to minimize your spend rate so that you can get to profitability that much sooner. And also these vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems are really for big league players. And so the people that are succeeding today in Silicon Valley are not the first-time users, the first-time entrepreneurs. They're the experienced entrepreneurs that are being invested in and given lots of money to see how big their ideas can expand into. And so these vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems often are not good places to start businesses.
So where should you start as an entrepreneur?
Well, often as an entrepreneur, there are two things. One is where to learn, where to prepare for your business. And that's about finding somebody that's willing and able to teach you the skills that you're going to need. So ultimately, it's about preparation. So prepare where you find that, mentorship, those coaches. In the story I tell, Estee Lauder, and she didn't have to go too far afield to find an uncle that taught her how to mix up, face cream and the like. It's sort of funny because the uncle was a chemist that basically formulated rat poison and eczema, ointments. But he knew about head cream also and the like. And Estee, who was then known as Josephine Menster, was a very avid student of his. So often you can find it within your family or friends and family, or maybe a professor or a teacher, or ultimately going up to somebody that you want to apprentice with and saying how much you admire their work and can I just help you out initially for free. And those are great places to prepare. That doesn't mean you want to start your business there, but most businesses do start nearby. Why? Because you've developed family and friends that will give you the emotional support that is really a very valuable component of starting a business, because it's so traumatic and challenging that emotional support of the family is often the most important determinant in where you start your business. But you should be aware of whether or not vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems exist in the types of businesses that you want. If you're in entertainment, it's LA or New York. If it's in fashion, it might be Milan or Paris, because those could be great places to find your mentor and to get your training.
When should you start a business? When an idea pops into your mind?
So if we've got an inkling, I'm interested in learning or understanding entrepreneurship, then basically that's the win. Okay, as soon as you ask the question, you want to start, because ultimately the underlying theme of the book is it's about preparation, and it's those people that have prepared, maybe over longer periods of time, are in the best position to take advantage of situations when they arise. And for that, I tell the story of Ray Kroc, who started McDonald's at the age of 52. He was struggling at selling milkshake mixers, but because he sold milkshake mixers, he really understood the restaurant business. And so when he saw the McDonald's food stand out in San Bernardino, California, he knew instantly the long-term impact that this was going to have on the food industry. He had prepared himself, and he had the sales skills. He understood, the dynamics of that business, that he was able to act quickly, seize the opportunity, and then scale that business at the age of 52.
I love the McDonald's story because I don't know what I had been told or learned earlier on, but he actually convinced the McDonald's brothers to give him their business. I mean, that's amazing.
Well, he convinced them to aggressively franchise the business, and he said, I'll take full responsibility for that. And they were happy to give him the full responsibility, although they set very onerous terms. So ultimately, Ray Kroc could not succeed. He could never be profitable under the terms that the McDonald's brothers set for him. But what he did figure out, with the help of somebody who ultimately introduced himself to Ray Kroc. Ray did not know this gentleman. This gentleman, who had worked for another aspiring fast food chain, came and pointed out to him that he was ultimately really in the real estate business. And by selling the real estate or renting the real estate to his franchisees, that could be a very profitable business. And so that was ultimately what enabled McDonald's to be a successful business today. Isn't the little percentage that they carve out from renting their franchises out, but in renting the building and the land to the franchisors.
You've said it earlier, you do not go this journey alone. This entrepreneurial thing, you have people who surround you. You have informal counsel, you have role models, you have support.
This is an emotionally taxing thing that you're going to do. You're going to have to selflessly give yourself to your customers and to your employees, to those people that are relying upon you. to help them be happier in the case of the customers, or successful in the case of those people that are dedicating their lives to helping you. And so you need support. This is part of the preparation. Find these people that are going to be able to give you emotional support, or skill support, or good advice, experience that they can share, relevant experience that they can share. By doing that preparation, your chances of success go way, way, way up. So whereas a aspiring high-risk entrepreneur might have odds of 1 in 500 of being successful, and a bedrock entrepreneur has about a 4 out of 10 chance of being successful. So huge difference in odds. You can even improve upon those odds through preparing. And ultimately, the book, I think, lays out a very simple, it doesn't require special traits that you're born with or anything like that. It's just about understanding how this works so that you can be in a good position to succeed.
When should you quit?
A lot of stories about that. In the book, I tell my own story about, because I succeeded as an entrepreneur, but there was also one time I failed as an entrepreneur. And I knew I needed to quit the first time, because ultimately I was doing it to prove to myself that I could start a business. And this business wasn't doing well, and things that I was attempting to increase sales weren't working. I wasn't a Sam Walton. And here, if I was going to let my inability to make this business successful take me down financially, then nobody would ever believe that I could be a big good businessman. And I did that business sort of as a part-time hobby, which was a bad move, big mistake. And so I had kept my executive job and did this on the side. And ultimately, it's because I didn't want to hurt my reputation as a business person that I knew when to stop. My second business, which ultimately was successful, as all businesses, there are times when things look bleak, and I tell some of those stories about how bleak these situations can be, and how I interpreted those situations, looked at them to realize that they weren't really telling me this is the right time to throw in the towel. People were saying, throw in the towel, but I knew enough about both, what options there were in and around these huge obstacles, and also my motivation, which gave me an ability to, really inspire the people around me to do these sharp right turns and these jigs and zags that are required in creating most successful big businesses.
Wow, so the time to quit is not really one answer, but many things that are coming to give you that information that it's time.
Absolutely. And ultimately, it's this preparation that I'm referring to, understanding why you're doing it, and how you've thought whether or not you're bedrock or high risk. All of that is giving you the essential information that will tell you if and when you need to stop, but it'll also tell you how to continue to go forward with something that can still work out.
And it may not even be money. It could still be, your business could be making money and you still decide to quit. Is that true?
Sure, absolutely. So when businesses succeed in giving you that satisfaction for why you started it in the first place, then you do have to reevaluate why you want to continue. And I tell, I describe a real live entrepreneur there, Jordan Wonkarsh, Jody Maroney's Sausage Kingdom. And at one point in time, Jordan was the largest purveyor of specialty sausage in the United States. And he had retail outlets, and he had, it was sold in Costco and Trader Joe's and, all these high volume places. And people adored these sausages. I still adore these sausages. And his story of how he had to reevaluate why he was doing entrepreneurship at certain points of time, and why that, in some cases, not totally understanding that led him astray and cost him huge amounts of money, and his business, lost enormous amounts of momentum when they really didn't need to. So that's very illustrative of why it's so essential to take the time to understand entrepreneurship and to understand how it really works, what the truth is, and not what we read in magazines or in newspapers or in TechCrunch or whatever. And for the vast majority of us, 50% of everybody will try to be an entrepreneur at some point in their working career. So this isn't for these special people. This is for all of us to understand. And just having these basic understandings increases our chances of success and our ability to actually have this be a personally fulfilling exercise rather than being some nightmare from which we can't awake.
What are the prerequisites to exploring to becoming an entrepreneur, or deciding whether to become an entrepreneur at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, nobody can guarantee you success, right? There are all these factors that you can't control: the economy, the weather, politics, or all of these things. But you can have a really high chance of success, right? So bedrock entrepreneurs, 4 out of 10 succeed in getting their businesses to be profitable. That's pretty darn good, okay? And then with proper preparation, it goes up from there. So if this is something that you want to explore, the message is do a good job of exploring it. Fortunately, I think building on bedrock is a great, easy way to start. It's right there. It's lots of fun stories. It's real people, role models, described right there. And so it's a good starting point, and the chances is that you're personally going to benefit from it when you or somebody you love, decides to be an entrepreneur.
What are the ethical responsibilities in becoming an entrepreneur?
So here it is. Entrepreneurship is about making people, some group, happy enough that they gladly give you money in return. So that's the fundamental principle. But the consequence of that fundamental principle is, and particularly in today's day and age, where for some reason, the society is sending the message that's to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to shoot for the moon, do it fast, use other people's money. So that's leading us to take shortcuts in making other people happy. That means we become manipulative. That means we deliver short-term, very hedonistic happiness, because just add sugar, just add, sex, just add, these things that ultimately might create some little short-term pleasures and manipulate people into, handing over money for these short-term pleasures. And yet, it doesn't help our society, really. and can lead us to behaviors that are definitely asocial in terms of, you know, promoting obesity or promoting, you know, sexually deviant, you know, desires to be practiced on, you know, unsuspecting people. And, you know, this is a side effect of the position that we put ourselves into with our entrepreneurs at this point in time.
And I'm just thinking to myself, as you speak, about all the things that really come down to ethics. We were talking about Facebook and sharing that data, that it's coming back now. You know, he's got to go before Congress and talk about what happened. And then you think about what happened in Hollywood. It's just like all those kind of things. If you're not a stand-up person, it will come back and take down an entire industry.
Oh yeah, and when there's a whole rash of these startups that were caught cheating, or cutting corners that really hurt their customers. They, you know, doing lab tests that were wrong, or you know, selling insurance through people that, you know, were unqualified to do that, and to lie about the number of, you know, doctors that were actually using your app. These are manifestations of this. Let's get rich quick. Let's use other people's money to do that. Let's, you know, roll the dice big time. And if the dice don't show up with the right number, then let's maybe jiggle the dice, you know, and hopefully nobody's looking.
Derek, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for watching Sarder TV, where thought leaders come to share their ideas. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Join us next time.